Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome back to episode 2. Or no, it's actually podcast number 3. I'm sorry, but it's part 2 of Muslims reached the Americas before Christopher Columbus did. And if you watched part 1 just now, you have enjoyed an account of some of the Muslim explorers who went to the Americas first. And you also heard me speak about the ancient Egyptians who went to the Americas apparently to do cocaine there. That was really interesting. And now we're going to get to a little bit of information about the Chinese, because I think I've said it in my videos on social media as well. Muslims were not the first one to go to the Americas, okay? Like, I never claimed that. Some people on Instagram, they try to kind of like, say I'm spreading lies, but the thing is, like, I know a lot of other people went there. The Vikings went there. The Chinese went there. Muslim Chinese went there as well. Like, everybody went there. It's not a big deal. But it is a big deal to me because I believe they're deliberately leaving out the information about Muslims going to the Americas. And the reason why, I think, is because it doesn't fit the narrative that they're trying to spread about Muslims right now. So the narrative is obviously that Muslims are really extreme, that they don't know how to cohabitate with people, and that they are always undereducated. And this story actually proves the opposite. And that's why I think it's so cool to talk about. I think it's really important for Muslims to have this knowledge and to, be exposed to the idea that, we are at the forefront of science and innovation and also civilization. And so that's something that if you especially live in the West, that's something you don't hear a lot in the media. That's why you got to stop watching TVs and you got to watch more podcasts. Okay. Anyways, I'm going to talk about the Chinese getting to the Americas before Muslims as well. And there's one Chinese Muslim specifically. He was an admiral called Chang, and we have some information that he actually arrived in the Americas in the year 1421, which is about 71 years before Christopher Columbus came. And his accounts have been verified by someone who wrote a book, a British marine historian. His name is Gavin Manses, and he actually was able to verify it as well. However, I think there's another story that's very interesting about the Chinese. And I don't have any link to the Chinese people, but if you're Chinese, if you're watching this and you're Chinese, I think you should really look into this. Maybe this is really well known in China. I don't know, but I love this story, so I'm just going to share it with you. Okay, so in 1972, there was I think he was like a mercenary. Like, what is that called? He was a person who goes around and talk about Christianity. What is that called? Not a Jehovah Witness, but he was like, another type of person who does that. Is it called like mercenary or something? Anyways, he found in a Korean antique shop, he found a map of the Americas, and it was a part of this book. And I'm going to tell you the book's name. The book is called the Shanghai Jing. And the Shanghai Jing is apparently this book that in the West is kind of like seen as a work of science fiction. And I see why they would want to say that. But the fact is that this man actually, he was able to get a lot of evidence of this not being true. Like, this is not a work of science fiction. And so what's interesting is that he said that the Chinese, like even like 400 years before Christ, that the Chinese were going there. Okay, so that's a long time. Like, obviously then, like, the time of the pharaoh was even before, so the Egyptians were there first. But no, I don't care. It's not a competition. Anyways, but the Chinese were there as well for a very long time. What's really cool about the story, though, is that when he died, his kids took over the research, because it turns out the kids were a little bit skeptic when their dad was alive. They were like, "Dad, stop. You're being silly, stop." But it turns out that their dad was right. And only when he died, they started to appreciate his work. This is like textbook immigrant family story, okay? So when he died, they started looking into the story, because I think they had it like in a box under their bed or something, like just like covered away, and under his son's bed. And so in 2003, she read a book, his daughter specifically, her name was Charlotte. She read a book and she kind of got this information which proved that yeah, people were there that he could have been right. Maybe she read a book about the Muslims. I don't know. Anyways, and then her and her brother, they started researching it, and they took the map also to the Library of Congress, where it stayed for 3 years, where it was being studied. And I guess they studied it themselves. They studied it themselves. I guess the people at the Library of Congress, which is in the US. And they found that it was probably true because she was doing research, like she was doing presentations on this everywhere. I think the Library of Congress was one of them. I think at Stanford as well. And she actually published a book about this in 2006 and 2008, which gave more indications of the Chinese Native American connection. So she's also saying there were connections between them. And I think this is really cool. she actually had this map, and this map showed. Wait, 1 second. The map actually showed this. Maybe her dad's map was not from the Shanghai Jing journeys, but the Shanghai Jing journeys, they did talk about it. So this mythical book in the West, supposedly, they did talk about it, and that was like a long time ago. Anyways, the map she had was from the same time, and it was found that, all of these descriptions of mountains, of rivers, of like natural, occurrences, they matched with the map her dad found. And I think that's really cool, So she managed to find out that 90% of what was written on the map was actually similar to what they found in America, which is, it shows that they knew what they were doing. And I think one thing is really cool, the Chinese, they're pretty impressive because they also invented the printing press in the 4th century, right? And so this is something that the Germans like to take the credit for in the 15th century. I wanted to find out, when was the first time that printing press was used in the Muslim world. I've had a bit trouble finding it out, but basically I don't mind giving the credits to the Chinese. Like they were doing this way before. And one thing I find very annoying though is that I can really say that when I grew up, I got a lot of negative PR about China, like a lot of videos, a lot of news. And now I'm looking back, and I'm really thinking I think there was a huge campaign against them. And I don't blame that the Chinese have become very anti, that part of the world, because they have been criminalized a lot. That's my perception now. And also when I read all these things, I'm like, they're definitely not being painted as people who were, very successful or very smart. Like it's the opposite. And if you're Chinese, I really think you should look into it. And so I also think that we could definitely benefit from getting to know more Chinese and being, more aware of their culture. I think what's interesting is I always see these videos of kids at Chinese schools, and those kids are the future. Yo, those kids are cooking, cleaning, doing sewing, I don't know. They're doing all types of crafts. They could survive during an apocalypse. These kids are smart. I know the Chinese are also very strict on what is allowed for these kids to watch. I think they don't have access to a lot of social media and stuff because it makes you dumb. I think that's a good choice. Not this, of course, not this podcast. But I think they're doing a right thing. And I think, we need to really also, I feel really compassionate towards them because I think they might have experienced the same thing as Muslims. I don't even doubt that. And I feel like a lot of these world powers that are being criminalized nowadays, we really need to think straight about whether or not it's true what we read about them. That's just what I wanted to say. Okay, how much time do I have? Oh no, I actually forgot to turn on the timer. I don't know what we're doing. What is it? I think I'm talking for 10 minutes. Anyways, I'm just gonna try turn it on now. Was it? I think so. Yo, I gotta catch a flight. I'm nervous. Okay, anyways, we're gonna talk about Columbus and his lies, and I love to talk about that. Okay, so what is interesting, there's several professors, I'm going to outline them for you in a little bit, who have spoken about Columbus. And until this day, new information about him is coming out, okay? Okay, let's start. First of all, Weiner said that Christopher Columbus knew very well that there was going to be a presence of, or there was a presence of West African Malis in the Americas, the Madingas, okay? And I personally feel, I think he tried to hide this. And I have evidence from, well, not evidence, but I have professors who talk about the same thing, that he knew it, he recognized it, he was aware of it. But if you look at his journals, it is definitely filtered out. And so his journals, he had a diary. It's also been said it's been tampered with. Like his journals don't make sense completely. So some of the things that were in there have been probably taken out. Maybe they've changed things. I don't know about that for sure, but it's been tampered with. Okay, so I want to tell you some cool things because I already made a video about how, he was a liar and I posted that already. And I just want you to know something. Okay, this man committed one of the biggest genocides in the world. Okay, he was like the leader of that and they still commemorate this man every day, every year in the US. In the US, there's Columbus Day, and there are certain states who have said, no, we're not doing this anymore. It's called Indigenous People Day. But there's several states where they refuse to let it go. And on these days, if the indigenous people, I'm going to talk about this in my next episode, if the indigenous people protest against it, they get beaten down like crazy. Okay. First of all, by the Americans who want to continue to celebrate Columbus Day. And second, also law enforcement is very harsh on them. And I'm going to talk about this next time in my next episode because the stories of the indigenous people is insane. If you want to talk about oppression, if you want to talk about genocide that's going on until this day, you need to hear about the indigenous people in the US. And the thing is, like, the reason why I think all of us need to be very concerned with that is because, obviously we Muslims have been in touch with them at some point in history. That's what we have several accounts of. We have several professors who confirm this. And the thing is, like, they live together very peacefully. And I just want to tell you something. No, I cannot tell you because it's not this episode. I need to talk about it next time. Anyways, my dad used to work with him, and I love to talk about that. Okay, anyways, we have to go back to Columbus and his lies. Okay, Columbus and his lies. We're going to talk first about his fellow explorer, and his name is Rodrigo de Triana. Why do I think it's cool to talk about him? Because after Rodrigo went with Columbus to the Americas, he converted to Islam, okay? And you have to understand one thing. Columbus came from a country where for centuries they had a holy war against Islam, okay? His king and queen who financed this, Isabel and Fernando, I don't know if his name is Fernando or Fernand. Anyways, they financed his travels and they were like the leaders of like the holy war against Muslims. When people talk about a holy war in Islam, you gotta check yourself. There was a holy war going on at that time, Christians trying to mass murder all these Muslims. And, in some ways, it's still going on. I just want to say that. But basically, Rodrigo de Triana went to the Americas. He was in touch with all these natives who were Muslims. Like, I have enough professors, enough experts who have confirmed this. I even know indigenous people who I really wanted to interview, but some of them are dead actually, who came from a long line of, for example, Cherokees who were Muslim. And so this is a thing. Basically, now they're saying, no, they're trying to make him look bad. Like Rodrigo Triano, he converted to Islam, but I'm pretty sure more Spaniards converted to Islam. Although it's really weird that he first went to the Americas to convert to Islam. So what I think happened, if you look at the timeline, is like, okay, they were fighting with the Muslims in Cordoba dynasty, in Al-Andalus, like this whole Spanish time period where Muslims were actually ruling. The Spanish were fighting them. The Christian Spanish were fighting them. I think it might have been the first time where he openly could be amongst them and to get to know them. And that's perhaps the reason why at that time he converted instead of when he was back home in Spain, where, at the time when they went to the Americas, actually the Spanish, they won, right? They ruled now Spain again for like 1 year or like very recently. So like the Muslims were defeated in Spain. Then Christopher Columbus went there. And I guess at that time already in Spain, being Muslim was outlawed. Okay, you have to understand that. And so still, Rodrigo de Triana went there, went to the Americas, and then came back and converted. And so he supposedly was also the one who saw America first, and he was supposed to get a reward for that. But they kind of like, you know, they kind of didn't do that anymore. Like he kind of was like discredited. It was said about him, no, he didn't see it, but there's accounts that say he did see it. And he's discredited as a person. Obviously, when you convert to Islam in that society, like you do not count anymore. So that was the story of Rodrigo de Triana. So I think that's really cool. And then we have his son. His son also he also confirmed that he encountered Muslim natives in America. He talked about their clothing. I think he also talked about his dance, or maybe that was one of the other explorers, because basically there's a lot of explorers who have all one by one said, yes, there are Muslims there. They dress like Muslims. They talk like Muslims. They do events like Muslims. Like they're Muslims. And so it wasn't just Columbus, but Columbus himself only once in his diary said he saw a mosque, and that I think was Cuba. I'm not sure though. But anyways, he did mention it once, mosquitas, okay? But then there's other explorers who didn't just say they saw it once. You know, some said I saw like hundreds of them. And that, for example, was Cortez. Cortez said he said I saw hundreds of them. And that was actually in Mexico. And that's when I got death threats, okay? Anyways, what does the fall of Al-Andalus have to do with Christopher Columbus' travels? Ooh, I love this part. Okay, this is something someone told me. I thought this was really interesting. And actually, it's true. I mean, okay, so there's two things I think you have to know about this story. So there is this researcher, not a researcher, he's a professor at Yale. And he actually did a lecture. You can look it up. You can look everything up, okay? Don't always like message me for sources. You could literally look everything up. And basically he said, this professor at Yale said that Christopher Columbus was very aware of all of the Muslim influences, and he himself was influenced a lot by Muslims. Okay, in his life, throughout his life, he was influenced a lot by Muslims. I'm going to tell you a little bit of a lowdown for you to understand that better. How much time do I have? So it's like 8 minutes now, so it would be 18 minutes. Okay, 12 more minutes. Okay. Anyways, where do we start? Okay, someone on IG actually told me that when the Muslim empire Al-Andalus fell, they robbed all of these palaces by the Muslim kings, and that's how they financed the travels overseas. So you have to understand that going to the Americas, finding the Americas was built on Muslim wealth. I found out for that to be true, okay? Because Professor McHale from Yale, he actually confirms that. He talks about how Christopher Columbus was able to get his travel financed by the king and queen at the time because once they won from the Muslims, they also garnered a lot of wealth, obviously. So that's one thing that's really interesting. Another thing that you need to know, and I mean, all of you need to know this, okay, is that it wasn't just the Muslims, right, who were robbed. It was also the Jews, because being Jewish was not allowed in the Spanish kingdom. You know, like Christians, they did not want Jews to be there. So the Jewish and the Muslims, they lived together peacefully. They lived together peacefully. All religions lived together peacefully in the Cordoba and like the dynasties after that, all the Muslim kingdoms. Al-Andalus, it was a mixture of all religions, including the Jews. When the Christian empire led by Isabel and Fernand, I think his name is Fernand, fell, however, all of them were driven out of the cities and their stuff was confiscated. And like, this is not something that just happened there. I mean, this happened also in World War II. You know, in World War II, like, I don't know if I talked about it last time, but basically the Dutch, you know, were very active in deporting all the Jews, prosecuting all the Jews. Why? Because they could rob them afterwards. Okay. And like, that's not pretty. I'm sorry. I wish I could make it sound better, but that's exactly what happened. And so Christopher Columbus, he was like going there with the money that was stolen from Muslims and Jews, first of all. So this is directly related to the fall of Al-Andalus. Then another thing I want to share with you, it's a little bit juicy, it's a little bit controversial, but basically very recently, the 13th of October, this research came out and it was published, it was talked about on the state news of Spain that Christopher Columbus had Sephardic Jewish DNA. So this was a 22-year-old study, not 22-year-old. The study had been done for 22 years for them to find out where he was from. And it turned out he's Sephardic Jewish. So the thing is, like, it's not necessarily interesting to me. Like, I don't really have an issue with that. The thing is, however, at that time, if you would take that into account, it would have been illegal for him to be even in Spain because you were not allowed to be Jewish there. So it could be that maybe over the time, his family converted, maybe they kept it on the down low because they didn't want to admit that the person who was glorified in their community was actually Jewish, because you couldn't be Jewish, that was not allowed. And so I remember when this came out, I saw it somewhere, and I think on LinkedIn or something, or maybe someone on Instagram told me. And I remember reading like all these responses of people, and some people were like, I want to distance myself of this, I'm Jewish and I just feel so bad because he killed all these people. And then people started saying, but your religion should not be held accountable for what these people are doing, what he did. And then someone responded, a Muslim said it. Okay, so basically someone else said then, she was actually a Muslim. She said they shouldn't be held responsible, the Jewish people. But she said the Muslims have been held responsible for things that supposedly have been done in their name. And that's also very questionable, aka 9/11. Anyways, I thought what was interesting though is that what you need to take into account is that, okay, even if he was Jewish and he did that, and what if he was like a practicing Jew? I don't care about that. But the thing that's most important is like who was financing it. And I think that draws a really interesting parallel to what's happening now in the world. Who's financing it, but putting a Jewish person in front of it? Like, that's the question you need to ask yourself. And it was a Catholic kingdom that was financing it, but it was a Jewish person leading it and going there and doing the work. Okay, anyways, what I want to say furthermore, there's nowadays accounts coming out that Muslims were even in Australia. We know that Muslims were all over the world. They were all over Africa. They were all over India. They were all over Asia. Why wouldn't they then be in the Americas? Like, it doesn't even make sense, And so, but it just remains this thing where people want to make it like, it's obviously now America is a place where mostly former Europeans live. And I guess the idea they want to commit to is that, okay, they want to admit that the Vikings were there. They're okay with that. But I think one thing that's really hard for them to admit is that the Muslims were there, because it meant they had the innovation, but it also meant they had the decency not to murder everyone. So I keep going back to this thing because it's kind of like, something I care about a lot. Anyways, I think now 5 minutes left. What? Okay, I have so much still to say. This is crazy. Okay, let me quickly go. Okay, basically, I think I've talked about it in my videos before. The Moroccans who let Christopher Columbus. I just want to say something really small about that. A lot of people commented when I posted that video saying, how crazy that they did that when he's such a terrible person and blah, blah, blah. But I think we need to take into account that if they voluntarily let him, that they were most likely also oppressed under the Spanish rule, because it wasn't even allowed to be Muslim at the time. Okay, so if they did it, like, you have to wonder and ask if they did it voluntarily. I mean, there is also this idea that they were businessmen themselves, maybe they were doing trade, but I think we also need to take into account that they might have been doing it even though they didn't really want to work with them. Like, why would they have to work with Christopher Columbus if they're doing all the work and they're the ones who are then having to give all the treasures to the Spanish rule? Like, it doesn't make sense. Okay, before I go, I'm just quickly gonna go through some of the books that I talked about before. The first one being Leo Weiner's book, and I think this is one of the best books about this topic, and he's from Harvard University. One of his books is called Africa and the Discovery of America. I found this book actually in Qatar. I've looked for books like all over the world, you could say. Sometimes in digital libraries, sometimes like literally going to shops, sometimes just going to the library. But this one was owned in Qatar. And I was really happy about that. I couldn't get it delivered in the Netherlands anywhere or like in UAE. Okay, then we have the second one, Barry Fell. He is the professor who is also from Harvard, I think, Museum. And he wrote a book called American Saga. And this one is filled with evidence, because what's really interesting is he looked a lot at the inscriptions in stones all over America to prove that there were schools run by the Muslims in Kufic Arabic script where they were most likely teaching the indigenous people. And so they were teaching them in astronomy, mathematics, geonomy, I always say this wrong. How do I say geography? Okay, anyways, I didn't write it here. Arithmetics and even religion and sea navigation. I think that's so amazing. Anyways, I think that's super cool. If you want to read the book, you should totally read it. Like I couldn't find a physical copy, but I found it on the American website called archive.org, and basically they just scanned in all the different books from everywhere, so you can just read it online. Then there's Alan McHale. I already mentioned him. He did this lecture on YouTube. And basically, some of the things that I think were really interesting about this lecture is that he goes really deeply into how much the Muslims were hated by the Spanish rule and how Christopher Columbus literally grew up being taught very negative things about Islam. And he himself got in touch with Muslims when he was becoming a sailor. And he lived, okay, he was being dramatic. He was fine. And one of the things, though, that I think is really obvious from this account from McHale, like what is his name? Alan McHale, is that Christopher Columbus was greedy, okay? He was not an explorer. He was a robber. He was a robber, first of all. And he was a pirate. I think pirate would be more applicable than a explorer. An explorer is someone like Kashkash ibn Sayyid ibn Aswad. Okay, that's an explorer. He went there, he kept his little paws to himself. He didn't rob everyone, he didn't kill everyone. Christopher Columbus went there, he went to rob everyone. They talked about how nice the natives were, how docile they were, how friendly they were, how they gave them everything. And then he was like, they are our enemy. I mean, that's a terrible person. We need to talk about how terrible he was. Anyways, I have like a million reasons why I want to call him terrible. There's so many things about him. I don't like him. Okay, so what did he also do? He's such a calculated, manipulative little rat. But because basically he used the anti-Islamic sentiment in Spain to get them to finance his travels, because he was just like a rat, waiting for his opportunity to go abroad and then steal. And so he noticed that King Ferdinand and Isabella, they had already said it's a global war against Islam. So what did he do? He said, we need to find a way to find more gold, and we need to find a way to avoid the Muslims because they were afraid of the Muslims. And basically, that's how he got that money, because when Isabel and Fernand won in Spain, they felt good about themselves. They were like, we can literally murder all Muslims everywhere. That's what they thought. And so then they were feeling really good. And then he, the little rat came begging for money again. And then finally, Isabella gave it to him, but her husband apparently didn't want it. Anyways, it led to such a great conquest of the Americas where they killed everyone. So I think that's really interesting to know. And they're not the only royals who were really desperate to go places and rob everything, because apparently there was another prince also mentioned by Alan McHale. I think his name was Henry. And he and Columbus were exploring together. They were going places trying to rob people. And basically, one thing I think is really cool, and I think it was Henry who said it, but I just have to find it again because it's just so cool. I think what Alan McHale said is that these explorers, they went to Africa where they found Muslims again. They went to Asia where they found Muslims again. They went to places trying to steal, but they couldn't. And then according to them, they felt the heavy presence of Islam surrounding them. And I think that's so funny because they hated Islam so much, because like their goal was obviously also to conquer Jerusalem eventually. Like they hated Islam. They talked very negatively about Islam. They had like this type of history created. They told their children about it. Like, this is Islam. This is how bad Islam is. But then they had to be honest and be like, the vibe was just very heavily Muslim. But like, I just wonder, like, you're like a person, you can literally feel it in the air. There's Islam, and you're not at any point thinking like, maybe I need to not like fight them. But okay, anyways. Okay, let me see. I think I am over time. Do I have anything left? Oh, because I have to go to the airport. Okay, anyways, what do I have to tell you guys? I had like a disclaimer. I had a disclaimer to tell you guys, like, please don't threaten to kill me again, okay? Anyways, I just want to give a little disclaimer. Don't get angry. I just read books. I'm referring to a lot of books. Okay, I did do the whole theatrical thing where I called Columbus a rat. I'm sorry about that. Shouldn't have said that. Anyways, I'm just saying Muslims were not the only ones who went there. Everybody went there. I'm saying everybody went there. I didn't say only Muslims went there. So please calm down, please, okay? And one thing I did want to say though is that Erdogan, basically, you mentioned this, that Muslims went to the Americas first in a speech. You know that Erdogan was like completely mocked by international media for this. I feel so bad for him. And I wish that, I wish people stuck up for him, because like he was obviously right. Like he wasn't lying, but people made him look like he was so crazy. Anyways, I don't think that's nice. Where was I left at? Okay, I'm just going to tell you the next episode is going to be about Muslims and the natives. I think this is so cool. I interviewed actual natives for this to give you brand new content. And it was so nice for me to speak to them. And I think you'll love it, what I'm going to tell you about them. I also have to do a podcast about Mexico, but I'm scared, obviously. I have to do one about Muslims in, the Mali Empire. I wanted to do that. All of those things. Okay. Anyways, what is the last thing I want to say to you? Look, I'm not trying to talk badly. It's not a disclaimer, so people don't get angry. No, I'm kidding. I'm not doing all of this to, talk down on people. I'm not. But I think what has happened in the past few decades is that Islam has been vilified so much that whenever you want to say something positive, it sounds like you're an extremist. But I think that, the opposite is true. If you look at the way, these stories I'm telling you about, the things they've been doing to Muslims, I think that's very extreme. The way they've gone over to the Americas to, kill all these people, I think that's crazy. It's crazy, and I want you to know that when people constantly tell you, you're this, you're an extremist, you're the one who like hates these people, you cannot live with each other. Sometimes we start to internalize that. And I just want to remind you of a history of wealth in knowledge, wealth in wisdom, and openness to sharing it, friendliness, giving away wealth, living with people side by side without murdering them, which is not something you hear about enough. And I just want to remind you of that. And obviously I'm going to keep reminding you, inshallah, in all these podcasts. And now I'm over time. I need to go because I got to go to the airport. Okay. But it was really nice talking to you all again. Please tune in next week. I'm not sure if I should do the 1 hour every 2 weeks or half an hour every week. So I'm going to check that with all of you on social media to see what you would like to do. If you want to become a public speaker like me, make sure to sign up for the course, speakoutcourse.com. That's where you can find it. And make sure to subscribe to my channel. And inshallah, I will see you all soon again. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for tuning into Muslim Glory. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you will never miss out on new content. If you want to amplify your voice and share your story, please sign up for my Speak Out course to kickstart your journey as a confident public speaker and content creator who can spread the word. Just head over to www.speakoutcourse.com to learn more. And remember, I'll be back with another informative episode, inshallah, celebrating Muslim glory. So please mark your calendar and join me again. Until then, stay inspired and keep striving for more excellence.